Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Matt Williams. I'm a tutor in politics and what is known as the Access Fellow here at Jesus College at the University of Oxford. Now, I am today going to convince you that we all need to be better at arguing, not in the sense of being argumentative and vicious and tearing chunks out of each other, because we've probably done, arguably, enough of that in recent years, but in the sense of being good at debating respectfully different points of view and working out how to convince someone that we've probably got the right answer. Now, this is a tremendously useful skill. In fact, it's the primary skill that we teach at universities like this, is not how to learn facts, but how to persuade an audience. Even in subjects you might not suspect involve a bit of debating, like maths and physics. Actually, there are so many different ways you can solve complex and indeterminate problems that debating actually is one of the primary skills that you end up taking away from a university like this. So how do you become good at debating, good at arguing? Well, first of all, we've got to work out what it even means. So a good argument, arguably, has 5 core components, which can be nicely summarized with the acronym CREW-A. So imagine you're in the A team, but you're in the A crew, and you're kind of getting there. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense. Anyway, CREW-A stands for claim, reason, evidence, warrant, and acknowledgement. Okay, so let me go through all of those with an example. So imagine we're trying to debate about whether or not school students should wear a school uniform, right? And so my claim might be something like, yes, they should wear a school uniform. So that's my claim. And keeping the claim nice and clear and direct is very, very helpful to your audience. They want to know what you're trying to sell, if you like. And so keeping that super clear is very, very helpful. The reason is the fundamental sort of point as to why you think school students should wear a uniform. So it could be something like, well, by definition, a school uniform makes people look and therefore arguably feel more equal to each other. Could be a primary reason. Evidence should be connected to that and should back up that reason in the real world. So give us some sort of tangible proof that that actually matters. So you might be able to find some evidence that school students that dress the same tend to perform better academically than those that don't have to dress the same, for example. The warrant is quite interesting. The warrant is sort of the license that you take from the audience to make your claim. And so this is some sort of basic shared understanding that you and the audience have, and that gives you a right, if you like, to make that particular claim. So it could be something as straightforward as, we all agree that every child has the right or ought to be able to access the best possible education. And so that could be a sort of a basic warrant, a basic license that gives you the right, if you like, to make the claim that school students should therefore wear a school uniform. You need to try and sort of work out that basic level that pretty much everyone in your audience will agree on. There won't be many people that would disagree that every child should have access to a good education, and you probably don't need to worry about convincing them because you just need to get most of the audience on side, right? So that's your warrant. And then finally, acknowledgement is very, very important. Acknowledgement is where you acknowledge what your opponents are or could be thinking in order to respond effectively to it. Not just sort of dismiss or ignore what your opponents are thinking, but to really get under their skin. And I'm going to talk about that at length a little bit later. So where should you even start if you're trying to build an argument? Well, it's fundamentally important to focus on the question, because that, if you like, is your field of battle, and you do not want to surrender it to your opponents. Now, although I started this video by suggesting we should have a more sort of polite and gentle discourse with each other, that does not mean that I don't think you should try and win at all costs, okay? Yes, we should be able to talk to each other, but we've got to try and come up with some answers, and we've got to move forward as a society. So winning debates is important. And one crucial way to make sure that you try and win is to make sure that you're always focused on the question, because that's where your audience are. They want to find out an answer to this intractable question. And so they don't want you to just abandon that by losing focus. So let's take that example of, should students wear a school uniform? How do you make sure that you're focused on the question? You need to try and identify some of the key words that we are going to hold the argument about. Now, if you take a parallel example of lawyers in a courtroom, they might hold their focus on the words guilty, not guilty. So that's the thing that pretty much every single word they'll say in the trial will be fixated on those words. So you need to try and identify something similar. So in the case of, should students wear a school uniform, what is the focal word there? Well, one way to try and isolate it is to provide an answer in as few words as possible. So if someone asked me that question, the shortest, most simple answer I could provide would be something like, yes, they should. And so it's the word should that is actually the focus. Yes, there's some other stuff in this question that's a little bit ambiguous, like uniform. What does a uniform mean? And we'd want to have some clarity about that. But ultimately, the focus of our argument, the thing we're really going to be ripping apart, is the word should. And so you should clarify what that means. It also provides you a useful way to structure your argument so that it has a bit of development, a bit of growth to it. What we tend to get in debates and arguments is sort of a shopping list of lots of factors. What we really want is a recipe, not a shopping list. So linking your points together can be really helpful. And now we've worked out what the focal point of the question is, we can much more helpfully link the points together for our audience. So we could take, for example, should could mean at least two things. We might say that someone should do something because we've all agreed that it's just the right thing to do. It's just, we consider with various rules of what's good and what's not good, this is something that is good and therefore we should do it, right? Another sort of reading of should is that you should do something because of the benefit, some sort of consequence it will have. So you don't do it because it's intrinsically good, you do it because of something else it will lead to. So there are at least sort of two ways we could read should, and therefore there are at least two ways we can break up our debate about whether or not school students should wear uniforms into those two component parts whilst retaining an absolute focus on the question. So before you do anything else, make sure you know what the question is and what the focal point of the question is. So what about research? How should you get yourself informed on a particular subject? Well, bear in mind that when you are doing a bit of research, you're not actually going to find the answer to these difficult questions, because why would you be debating them? If there was a correct answer out there, then there wouldn't be any point in us debating it. So when you're doing some research, when you're getting yourself informed, you've got to keep that in mind. You're not just going to stumble across the answer to these things. But nonetheless, it can be very helpful, especially when you're trying to develop that evidence, which is so crucial to convincing people that you're not just talking about your own beliefs, you're actually talking about the real world. So research is unquestionably helpful, but you can keep researching and researching all you like. You're never going to find the correct answer, so just keep that in mind. Now, my top tip for debating or arguing is empathy. The real killers, the properly sort of super successful debaters and arguers are the ones that have the greatest empathy. Now, this sounds completely counterintuitive, right? You wouldn't think of someone who has the sort of cutthroat, ruthless capability of arguing to the best of their ability would have a great deal of empathy. I mean, what do I even mean by empathy? I mean the capacity to think and feel what your opponents are thinking, to get in their shoes and to walk a few miles in them. This is something that is clearly lost in some aspects of contemporary politics, for example, is that we have these tribes and they just are seemingly incapable of acknowledging their opponents as human beings, even, of having valid thoughts. And that is such a useless way to succeed in a debate, because in a debate, most of the audience will be very, very unsure. They won't know what the correct answer to these problems are, and they'll be sitting sort of uncomfortably on the fence. So if someone sort of blasts in and says, don't listen to my opponents, they're stupid, they're evil, they should be completely ignored, this wavering audience are not going to agree with you. They're going to think you're arrogant, they're going to think that you are making personal attacks rather than actually building a case. And also they will think correctly that you're not engaging with possible alternatives, because the fact is that many of these interesting arguments do not have a determinative single solution to them. They have lots of possible solutions. And what we're trying to do is to weigh up which amongst a lot of possibilities are better or worse options. And so empathy is fundamentally important. Going back to what I was talking about with regards to lawyers in court when they're dealing with guilty, not guilty, you know, the best lawyers, the best defense lawyers who try and make sure that their client gets a not guilty verdict will be thinking exactly what the prosecution are going to say. They're going to be empathizing with the prosecution. They're not just going to assume the prosecution are evil, mad, foolish, and so on. They're going to actually think, this is what they will try and claim. This is why they will try and claim it. This is how they will try and claim it. And here's how, deliberately and carefully, I will take that wavering audience, that uncertain, insecure audience, and help them understand why, with respect to what the prosecution is saying, my defense is still stronger. And you need to do the same with any sort of debate, any sort of argument. So if we go back to our uniform, whether or not school students should wear school uniforms, if I just sort of dismissively say, well, anyone who disagrees with me, is inhuman, then I'm going to just lose the audience. And that is complete disaster. In a debate, ultimately, the audience is everything. They are so, so powerful. And you've got to keep them. And there are various other ways you can keep them. I mean, keeping it relatively light can sometimes be a good idea. Obviously, in some debates, that would be inappropriate, but being sort of relaxed and calm and engaging is quite a good idea. Making sure that you maintain eye contact as far as you're able to do so, and not just reading automatically off a script, but understanding the key points you need to make, and then perhaps being prepared to riff and just extemporize. In other words, to just talk off the cuff can be quite a good idea. So think about ways to get on side with the audience, because they are ultimately the ones that hold the power in any debate. And your audience will vary. It might be someone in a debating chamber. It might be an interviewer. It might be, a colleague. It could be all sorts of individuals that are your audience. And you're still sort of trying to convince them that you have the best answer to this knotty problem. And so keeping them on side is fundamentally important. So I hope this all makes a bit of sense, and that you understand why I say that we all need to be better at arguing, and why universities like Oxford invest an awful lot of time and energy in teaching how to argue well for all of our subjects, why it's so important. It's not just important in terms of giving you good labour market skills, which it absolutely does. Someone who can solve a problem such as, how are we supposed to grow this business, or how can we do the best for this client, or how can we, help educate these young people. These are sort of intractable, difficult problems for which we will need debaters and arguers to perform well. But besides those sort of labour market skills, it's just a fundamentally important human skill. We have been blessed or cursed, depending on your perspective, with the capacity to think about and talk about difficult problems. And in that context, being able to convince other people that you have the best solution not only makes you powerful, but it also makes you, a contributor to the human conversation. It's so, so important. So make sure you get yourself skilled up on debating and arguing, because it means a lot. Okay, I hope that makes sense. If not, let me know in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much. Bye now.